It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. The Mark Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Mark is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Mark Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for our weekly discussion of the important political and legal issues of the day. You're welcome to call in at 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. You can also send me a tweet at Mark Scaringi, and I'll read your tweet on the air. For all my columns, prior podcasts of the show, and a look at some great merchandise we have, check out the MarkScaringiShow.com website. And today we're broadcasting on Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live. Again, so welcome to the followers and friends of Harrisburg 100. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving dinner and enjoyed the time spent with family and friends, and hopefully you didn't get into any political arguments as you were enjoying your Thanksgiving turkey. Thanksgiving is, of course, a uniquely American holiday, and we give thanks to our forefathers for founding this great nation. They crossed the Atlantic with very little, but an iron will to make a better world for themselves and their children here in the New World, as it was then referred to. So hats off to them and their courage and their perseverance. And we want to thank our native Indian forebears as well for their open border, unlimited immigration policy that allowed thousands and thousands of our European forefathers to come here, colonize, and basically take over this beautiful land. Our Indian friends perhaps should have paid a little more attention to the importance of protecting and defending their borders and the importance of private property rights, capitalism, and technology. Those concepts served us pretty well. You'll have to forgive me. I'm feeling a little manly today. I was up at the crack of dawn around 10:30 out in the woods killing my very first tree of the year. There were trees everywhere on that tree farm we visited. So I was out thinning the herd today in the rain and cold. In the rain and the cold weather. And while it was very cold, and where is Al Gore's global warming when you need it? We sure could have used a little global warming this morning. This is the time of year when we count our blessings as a nation and as individuals and families. In some families, it's a tradition to go around the table and have each family member express what they're grateful for this year. We tried that a couple of times over the years in our family. It led to some very interesting responses, so we dropped that tradition. But President Trump, staying in character, when asked by a reporter at Mar-a-Lago what he was thankful for this year, he replied that he was thankful for himself. He said, "I've made a tremendous difference in the country. This country is so much stronger now than it was when I took office. That you wouldn't believe it." So that's our president of the United States, who is thankful for himself and for the policies he's put into place since he took office. Well, the president's, of course, taken some heat in the media for his rather self-congratulatory statement about what he's thankful for. But is anyone offended by the president saying on Thanksgiving Day that he's thankful for himself? Of course, we're taught not to congratulate or brag about ourselves, so the president perhaps gets a poor mark for etiquette. But what is more important than etiquette is whether America and the American people are strong, safe, and prosperous. And that's what Trump knows and is taking the time to remind us of. Now, speaking of the open borders policy of our Indian forebears, President Trump himself has been focusing on this migrant caravan that has been streaming its way through Mexico and up to our southern border. The Central American men in the caravan pushed through and over the fences separating Guatemala from Mexico. They pushed aside the Mexican Federal Police and the Mexican Army. President Trump threatened to withhold aid to Mexico, which apparently caused Mexico to actually start trying to defend its border. But the Mexican police and army were manhandled by the caravanners who were using rocks and knives to make their way through. At least one Honduran migrant has been killed and over a dozen Mexican officials have been injured in these clashes. The Honduran immigrant, of course, despite the false narrative being brought to you by the media that these migrants are fleeing persecution, was actually coming north for work. According to the Los Angeles Times, his family said he left Honduras because he was constantly broke. So that's his reason for coming north, but regrettably his life was taken from him during these clashes between the migrant caravan and the Mexican federales. But further north in the Mexican town of Tijuana, which sits very close to the U.S. border in the U.S. city of San Diego, migrants have been protesting. They're, according to the mayor of the town, causing severe financial distress on the people of Tijuana. Its mayor called the situation a humanitarian crisis and claimed the Mexican federal government had not helped the city deal with this massive influx of migrants. And the mayor of Tijuana has stated he's afraid the migrants are bankrupting his city, which is, of course, already very poor. According to the San Diego Union Tribune, groups of hundreds of migrants are protesting the poor conditions they have been afforded by the Mexican people. One group of about 150 migrants were carrying white flags that read La Paz y Dios, or Peace and God. They separated from the larger caravan group and they inched within 500 feet of the U.S. border. They're protesting. They're very upset and angry with the conditions they have been given by the Mexicans. They're saying they're cold and sick. They're demanding better housing. They're demanding better food be given to them. I watched an interview of one Central American woman claimed the food that the Mexicans are giving her is pig food, is not worthy of having pigs eat it. So they're complaining about the quality of the food that's been given to them very charitably by the Mexican people. The town of Tijuana is spending about $30,000 a day to house, feed, and clothe these Central American migrants. The Mexican mayor is not happy about this situation at all. He's declared that I will not compromise public services. I will not spend Tijuanans' money. I will not bring Tijuana into debt now in the same way we haven't done so these past 2 years. So that's a Mexican government official stating that he is going to defend the pocketbook of the Mexican people and not allow Mexicans to be bankrupted by the Central Americans who have illegally crossed into their border and are just kind of illegally situating themselves in the town of Tijuana and demanding housing, clothing, shelter, food, etc., from the goodness of the Mexican people. So I think it's an interesting twist. Our friends in the media almost uniformly call those of us who oppose an open border, who oppose unlimited migration, they refer to us as racists for not opening our borders and allowing tens of thousands of Central Americans to stream in. But yet Mexicans themselves are not happy with the Honduran migrants kind of squatting in Tijuana and taking their food, clothing, and shelter from them. So I wonder if Mexicans are racist against Hondurans. We'll talk more about this when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Let's get back to the Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial where we put the America first and we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day. Thank you for suffering through all of those Scaringi Law commercials. Wow, that's a lot of Scaringi Law advertising. I wonder if we have any other advertisers here on the Mark Scaringi Show. Maybe we'll play some other commercials later. We're talking about the migrant caravan and the reaction to it by Mexican authorities in Tijuana, and how the Mexican authorities are not happy that there are thousands of migrants camped out in their town and using their public services, and The migrants are demanding better housing, better clothing, better food to be provided to them by the Mexican authorities. Mexican authorities are saying, you're bankrupting us. This is not a good situation. It's a humanitarian crisis. Nevertheless, there we are. They're getting very close to the U.S. border. They're just a couple of inches away, one group of 150 flying the flag, peace and God. They want, I'm not sure what peace and God have to do with it, but they want to get into the United States of America. The Mexican officials, they've offered the migrants asylum in Mexico, and they've even put on a massive job fair offering migrants jobs in the Maquiladora section. Those are the thousands of factories that once populated Pennsylvania and other Midwestern cities and states and towns that were sucked down south of the border by that disastrous North American Free Trade Agreement. So there are jobs aplenty in the Maquiladora area, in the Ford factory and other plants down there that Americans used to enjoy, but nevertheless, through our free trade deals, they're down there in Mexico, and they're being offered to the migrants, those strong young men from Honduras and Guatemala and other countries in Central America apparently don't want those jobs, and they don't want asylum in Mexico. They want to get into the United States of America, which is, of course, the world's largest welfare state. So on Thanksgiving Day, while speaking with reporters in Florida, President Trump threatened to close down the border with Mexico for an undisclosed period of time if his administration determined that the Mexican officials, the Mexican government, had lost control of the situation on the border, which seems to be occurring as we speak. Now, of course, our federal courts here in the United States will never allow the president to close down the border. I think even if the Honduran or Mexican army was poised to cross over with tanks and artillery, the federal judges would not allow our president to close the border. That seems to be the way the situation is developing. Of course, President Trump himself was rebuked the day before Thanksgiving by the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts. Remember, the president had blasted the federal judges after the president lost the initial round in a lawsuit over the president's new policy on asylum and the migrant caravan. The president said about the judge who ruled against him, the president said this was an Obama judge, and I'll tell you what, it's not going to happen like this anymore. We will win that case in the United States Supreme Court. So the president was clearly very angry when he lost the first round in this lawsuit being brought by various left-wing pro-immigration, pro-open borders groups that had sued the United States government on behalf of Central American migrants who had not yet even entered the United States, but apparently they have lawyers and law firms representing them, clearing the way for them to come into the U.S. In any event, the president, not happy with the judge, referred to him, I guess, pejoratively as an Obama judge, and that resulted in a rare public rebuke of a sitting president of the United States by the sitting Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Chief Justice John Roberts actually issued a statement, which is even rarer, which said this: we do not have Obama judges or Trump judges, Bush judges or Clinton judges. What we have is an extraordinary group of dedicated judges doing their level best to do equal right to those appearing before them. That independent judiciary is something we should all be thankful for. So that was a statement by the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court rebuking the President of the United States. This is something that does not happen often or at all. We'll have to look back through the history books and see if we can find something similar to this. Trump, acting completely within character, of course, fired right back in a 7-tweet storm that lasted 2 days. The president tweeted, "Sorry, Chief Justice John Roberts, but you do indeed have Obama judges, and they have a much different point of view than the people who are charged with the safety of our country, it would be great if the Ninth Circuit was indeed an independent judiciary. But if it is, why are so many opposing views on border and safety cases filed there? And why are a vast number of those cases overturned? Please study the numbers. They're shocking. We need protection and security. These rulings are making our country unsafe, very dangerous and unwise. So that was the President of the United States, and he continued with several additional tweets, tweeting back at the Chief Justice. So I ask my listeners, is it true or not true? Do we have Obama judges in this country? Do we have Bush and Clinton judges? Do we have judges that carry out the political philosophy of the presidents who appoint them to the bench? Call in and let me know what you think. 717-540-0580, 717-540-0580. And was the president, was he within his rights to criticize a federal district court judge? Was he within his rights to criticize the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, the Ninth Circuit? It's not something that we're used to hearing from our presidents. We don't often hear them speak out publicly against the judiciary in this manner. And we rarely, if ever, hear a Chief Justice rebuke a sitting president. But is the president within his rights to criticize the judiciary? I'm interested to know what you think. Call in 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. Was the Chief Justice right to issue the statement? The Chief Justice claims he's defending the independence of the federal judiciary. But I'll offer a little bit of my perspective before we open up the phone lines and take your calls, because I want to hear what you think about this. Was the president attacking the independence of the judiciary? That's what the Chief Justice said. Was the president trying to dominate and control the judiciary and make it dependent upon the executive branch? Or was the president simply criticizing the judiciary? And there is a big difference between the two. But let's hear what my listeners think. We'll talk to Tony from Harrisburg. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
The way you can look at it is if you can tell what the opinion or what the person that appointed the judge by just their opinion, that's who elected or who nominated that judge for office. Many times I'll read an article in the opinion of the judge, and I'll be like, look, that's a Trump judge or that's an Obama judge. And I'll look them up, and yep, that's who appointed them. So I think we do. It's unfortunate, but just the fact of life,
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and Tony from Harrisburg, you're saying, we do have Obama judges, Trump judges, Bush judges, and Clinton judges, and you can tell that by reading the opinion, and you have a good sense by reading the opinion as to which president appointed the judge. And it's just kind of common sense, everyday parlance, the way we describe our judges.
Exactly. I mean, the president's put these judges not because they don't differ from their opinions. Trump's not going to put a progressive judge on a bench. Just not going to happen. That judge might change his opinions over his lifetime, but he's not going to go into the game as a progressive judge. Same with Obama. He didn't put any conservative judges on the bench.
True enough. Tony from Harrisburg, thank you. We'll take some other calls. Do we have Obama judges? Do we have Bush judges, Trump judges, or Clinton judges? We'll talk to Joyce. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Hi, thanks. We absolutely do. And that is why it is so important, in my opinion, that judges be appointed that are constitutionalists, because we are all people. And judges are, I'm sure, trying their best, many of them, to keep their opinion separate from the law. It doesn't always happen. We're people. There's absolutely no question that there is a slant. Our president was right in pointing out that certain lawsuits are continuously filed in certain areas of the Ninth Circuit for that reason. What surprises me is that our Supreme Justice didn't speak out during the Obama administration when he dissed the Supreme Court in his State of the Union. How about that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. You're talking about President Obama during one of his States of the Union addresses, lambasting the Supreme Court for its decision in Citizens United, and it was actually Sam Alito who spoke out publicly against the president's rebuke of the court.
So, I'm going back to the point that we're people also. I think maybe it's a good thing that Justice Roberts did say something, because what I'm thinking is maybe it will resonate with some of the judges that are leaning a little bit too politically minded as opposed to keeping their mind and focus on the law.
Okay, well, we'll see what kind of reaction we get from the court, and we'll see how this issue develops. Joyce, thanks for calling. Appreciate having the benefit of your views. We're going to take a brief commercial break, and then I want to stay with this topic. I want to know from my listeners, do we have Obama judges, Clinton judges, Bush judges, Trump judges? But also, I want to know, was the president within his right to criticize the federal judiciary? And was the Chief Justice, was he right to rebuke the president for doing so? Remember, the Chief Justice said it was about, he was sticking up for the independence of the judiciary. But was President Trump, was he attacking the independence of the judiciary, or was he simply criticizing it? We'll talk more about this when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Now, more of Mark Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial where we put America first, and we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day. We're talking about the tweet storm dust-up between the President of the United States and the Chief Justice of the United States. The Chief Justice firing back at President Trump's criticism of the federal district court in the Ninth Circuit. The president is obviously very upset with the loss he suffered in the initial round of a lawsuit brought by pro-immigration rights organizations on behalf of the migrants from Central America who want to cross the border into the U.S., and many of them will claim asylum, of course, even though they don't technically qualify for asylum. But nevertheless, that's how they'll get into the country, and that's how they'll be able to stay here for a long time, and they'll be able to stay here, of course, until and unless they're deported, which doesn't happen at the rates that the president wants them. So we're talking about the president's criticism of the federal courts and the Chief Justice firing back and defending the independence of the judiciary. We'll open up the phone lines and we'll take some questions. I want to hear what you think. Here's Jackie from Enola. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Hello, Mr. Scaringi. I was just wondering your opinions on all of the educators in the public schools teaching kids their far left opinions. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a great question, Jackie. Thank you for calling. Yeah, we in our public schools we do have there is some bias from teachers and administrators who are perhaps teaching a different version of history than the history that we actually experience. And I think it is pervasive in our public schools. It certainly permeates higher education. There's no question in my mind about that, having gone through many years of higher education. I'll talk, my thought about that is it's reflected in the way we talk about Thanksgiving, for example. And I was on a Penn Live reader forum a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking about how America was founded, and that America was founded not by immigrants, but by colonists, starting from Pennsylvania, and all of the original colonies were chartered by a British king. The first Americans were colonists and subjects of the British king who came into this country under charters and brought with them English law and English traditions and English values and made a new country in the land that had been here for ages. And that's colonialism, and that's the act of settling and colonizing a foreign land. So our forefathers were not immigrants; they were colonists, and it's remarkable to me that this is something that is not being taught in our public schools. It's not understood by so many people, and of course in the media. And if you speak about the founding of our country in that way, you are perceived to be out of the mainstream. And so I know I hear this refrain over and over again that America is a nation of immigrants, and the founding of our country was about immigration, when it wasn't. I mean, immigrants come from their homeland and they come to a new country that is itself a separate and sovereign country. The colonists came into this new world and created created their own lives within the sovereignty of their homeland. So it's a very different concept that is not being, in my view, taught in our public schools, which is evidenced by the fact that it appears that people don't understand, at least in the media, the very difference in what immigration is and what colonialism is, and what America was founded on. So I think that's a terrific question from Jackie. I appreciate that question, and it's a very important topic here during the Thanksgiving holiday. And so let me know what my listeners think about the issue of whether or not we have Obama judges or Trump judges, Clinton or Bush judges, and this dispute between the President of the United States and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The president is criticizing the federal judiciary, and my question is: does the president have the right to criticize the judiciary? The president, by the way, like you and me, he has a First Amendment right, doesn't he? He has the right to free speech, correct? I mean, the president doesn't give away that right when he's inaugurated and sworn into office. So he can criticize the court, can't he? Now, he can't try to dominate and control the court the way Democrats have in the past. Of course, Franklin Delano Roosevelt giving the greatest example of the chief executive trying to control the Supreme Court when he tried to stack the courts because he was upset that the Supreme Court, the way it was constituted in the 30s, in the early to mid-30s, was a conservative court, and it was striking down all of his liberal progressive programs and plans that, of course, got us deeper and deeper into the Great Depression with all of that socialism that was destroying even further the U.S. economy. And President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a great Democrat, fought back against the independence of the federal judiciary and tried to stack it with his partisan supporters who would go onto that bench with a liberal progressive jurisprudence and then allow his socialist New Deal to be fully implemented. So we do have a history in this country of presidents attacking the independence of the judiciary. That history comes from our friends in the Democratic Party. And this president is being criticized for attacking the independence of the judiciary by merely criticizing it. And I think that is a significant distinction. And our friends in the media need to draw that distinction so that people understand that one can criticize a federal court. One can criticize a judge's opinion. We still have the right to free speech. A president of the United States cannot try to dominate or control the federal judiciary, which is something entirely different. Let's open up the phone lines again. We'll take some calls, 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. Here's Larry. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Yes, hello. How are you today?
I'm great, Larry. What's on your mind?
I was calling about the judge issue. I've always been, they elect judges and run for those positions as Republican or Democrat, which to me kind of goes against what a judge is. A judge is supposed to be neutral according to the law, correct?
Well, that's a good point. You're talking about our state judges here in Pennsylvania who do run for office at the county level and at the appellate court, the statewide level. Of course, the federal judiciary is different in that federal judges don't run for office. They're appointed. They're appointed to those positions by the chief executive, by the president of the executive branch.
Right, but I think the same mindset then permeates through. Even though they're appointed, they still have run as a Republican, and I'm going to lump it in as that they're conservative versus Democrat, which is more liberal, where they shouldn't have a view like that. It should be, what does the law? They're to interpret the law, not in a liberal way or a conservative way. What does the law say? And does Trump have a right? Just as I am a citizen, he is, and we have a right to say that circuit court, the ninth, is wrong.
Yeah, Larry, I think you make a very interesting point, and I'm going to hang up and respond to the point that you've made, and then we're going to take a brief commercial break. And it is kind of an odd thing, isn't it, to have state judges running for office as Republicans or Democrats. It does kind of go against what you think about a judge or a member of the judiciary, that they are nonpartisan, that they are not biased by partisan politics. We don't want them to be. We want them to be fair and impartial and rule for or against Republicans or Democrats, not based upon political party, but based upon the rule of law. But it's an interesting thing that we have elected judges, for example, in Pennsylvania. That was a liberal progressive reform that came out of the liberal progressive movement in the early 20th century, in the 1920s, when progressivism was really sweeping through the country. One of its reforms was to elect judges, that somehow judges would be closer to the people and would represent the will of the people if they were elected in elections. And so that's a liberal progressive development in our government, the election of judges as opposed to the appointment of judges. We'll talk more about that when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to the Mark Scaringi Show.
Now back to the Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. Welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We talk about the important political and legal issues of the day, and we are doing just that. We're talking about political issues, legal issues, a fight or an argument, a disagreement perhaps between the Chief Justice of the United States and the President of the United States. The President criticizing the federal judiciary, obviously angered by his loss in the federal district court within the Ninth Circuit recently, early last week, in round one of a lawsuit brought by immigrants' rights organizations who are, I guess, representing migrants from Central America who want to get into our country, in my view, under a false asylum claim. And be in this country and then enjoy all of the benefits and privileges of this country once they're in here, of course, in my view, unlawfully. The president has threatened to the point of that was an executive order that President Trump had issued in response to the caravan. And the order said essentially, you will be denied asylum if you do not enter the country in one of our ports of entry. In other words, if you enter the country illegally outside of a port of entry, if you illegally enter the U.S., you will be denied asylum. But the federal district court, the judge presiding over that case, appointed by former President Barack Obama, ruled against the president, issued a temporary restraining order, ordering that the president's executive order not be placed or put into effect, so that migrants who from Central America or from wherever, regardless of how they get into the United States, regardless of where they cross the border, they will not be denied asylum by this executive order simply because they did not enter the U.S. at a port of entry. So that's the judge's opinion in his temporary restraining order. We'll see how that case develops, but President Trump not happy with that. He's threatened to close down the border. Of course, that will be immediately struck down by the federal courts if the president tries to close the border. But that resulted in a tweet storm by the president challenging the Chief Justice for the Chief Justice rebuking the President of the United States. And I, for one, I'm happy the President fired back at the Chief Justice. That Chief Justice John Roberts issued this statement does give me some pause. The judiciary is not supposed to be a political player. The judiciary is supposed to be a neutral arbiter of the facts and the law that are before it. And the Chief Justice's statement could be perceived by some as an admonishment for the president's speech. And the president has every right to refer to or characterize the federal courts in any way the president desires. The same way you or I do. The president, like you or me, is protected by the First Amendment, by our right to free speech. And the statement by the Chief Justice could have a chilling effect on the free speech rights of others. This is a highly unusual rebuke by the Chief Justice, and Americans, they like their judges to stay out of politics and not to engage politicians, to stay within the parameters of the courts and the cases that are before it, and to interpret the law to the facts of the case in front of these judges, and not to be political players. So I'm not really happy with the action and conduct of the Chief Justice, but that's my view. My listeners could have very different views. We'll open up the phone lines again. We'll take some more questions or statements if you want to make them. 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. Here's Joe from Duncannon. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Yes, hello.
Yes, hello. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Yes. In the late 60s, early 70s, I lived in California, and the local news had possibly Timothy Leary talking with his bullhorn to a protest movement and saying that, if you can't come and join us in our protest, become teachers, become professors, become lawyers, become journalists, and let's make the whole country believe as we do.
Okay. So, yes, and thank you for that call, our caller from Duncannon, and you're hearkening back to the call that we had earlier in the hour from Jackie from Enola, talking about in our schools, in our public schools, there seems to be some sort of left bias by our teachers and administrators. And of course, I, for one, we all went through public schools, or most of us went through public schools, and of course, when I went through college, I went to Georgetown, and it's supposed to be a conservative Jesuit institution of higher learning, but of course, the overwhelming majority of my professors were extreme left-wing liberals, and I had my political views. I felt under attack every day I walked into class, and that's not the way education is supposed to be. It's the pursuit of the truth, right? And the same way our judges preside over our cases, and we want them to do justice. and justice is to be color blind and politically blind. So I thank you for your call. We'll take another call. Jen from Mechanicsburg, you're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Oh, hi, Mark. Love your show.
Well, thank you, Jen.
And I apologize. I was catching pieces of your show as I was driving. But I was just struck by that there are no Obama judges, there are no Bush judges, there are no Trump judges. What just happened 2 months ago? Did we just not have the Kavanaugh confirmations? If there is a judge that is supposed to be completely unbiased, why were people literally clawing at the doors of the Supreme Court? There's nothing that says it more clearly that judges are going to, render decisions that are going to be slanted one way or the other. So just one point. And I think the other one would be that, with the travel ban, there was also the dissenting opinion, I think it was Sotomayor, and her concern was really about us being compassionate. There was nothing about the constitutionality of anything. It was really about showing that we as a country were compassionate, and we were not going to be compassionate toward these people. So I'm confused, as a citizen who's not with a legal background, how a single judge seems to have more authority than the United States president when they can literally make a decision that is going to override an executive order. Can you explain that to me?
Wow. And Jen from Mechanicsburg, thanks for calling. That was probably the wisest question we've had yet on the Mark Scaringi Show. We have a caller in Jen from Mechanicsburg citing the dissent in the travel ban decision. I'm not so sure that I can speak too intelligently about the dissent. Yeah, and the caller is making the very insightful point that using the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings as an example of how politicized our judicial confirmation process is. This is Brett Kavanaugh was appointed by President Trump, and even before Brett Kavanaugh's name was announced, the Democrats, the Senate Majority Leader, the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, the head of the Democrats in the Senate, announced they would oppose any nominee put up by President Trump. It was so politically partisan, and Jen from Mechanicsburg is unhappy about that, and she's right that our confirmation of judges has become extremely partisan and political. And Brett Kavanaugh was attacked and denounced by liberals and Democrats, not for his jurisprudence. I don't remember them talking about one case of his. It had nothing to do with whether or not he had the intellectual ability and the experience as a judge to sit and serve on the Supreme Court. Of course, that had nothing to do with his confirmation proceedings. Instead, it looked like a political attack on this man because he was appointed by a Republican, and the Democrats were going to do whatever it took. I mean, that's an exact quote from the Democratic leaders in Congress. They were going to do whatever it took to deny Judge Brett Kavanaugh his confirmation to the United States Supreme Court. That is a blemish on our country and on our political process. That was a travesty and a miscarriage of justice that occurred. So I think, all of our callers today confirmed that we have Obama judges and Bush judges, Trump judges, and Clinton judges. The president was simply articulating what all of our callers today have stated is a truism, that is the way it is. And the Chief Justice rebuking the president, in my view, is not good for the court. First of all, the Chief Justice is not going to win in a war of words with President Trump. No one wins in a war of words with President Trump. So the Chief Justice is getting far beyond where he should confine himself. And we do not want our courts to be involved in rebuking other elected officials from other branches of government for simply expressing their First Amendment rights. We all have the right to criticize the president, to criticize members of Congress, and even yes, to criticize our esteemed and distinguished members of the judiciary. And the president, in his unique way, is reminding us of that. That's about all the time we have today. Thanks for listening to the Mark Scaringi Show, and enjoy the rest of your Thanksgiving weekend.